As I say, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon Alistair McIntosh, who will be facilitating this afternoon's session. Alistair's no stranger to the ECIA and the CIIA in the UK. Alistair is currently an advisor to the Scottish Government. He's previously been the Policy and External Relations Director of the CIIA in the UK and Ireland, and he's worked extensively in Brussels in various lobbying positions. Alistair, it's very good to see you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good afternoon to everyone. The topic of this afternoon's session, sustainability, is both vast and difficult, but it is also vital. It's of increasing significance strategically to internal auditors, to leadership teams, to boards, to regulators, to shareholders, and to society as a whole. We've come a very long way since the United Nations Brundtland Commission first defined sustainability back in 1987 as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And reporting of environmental and social performance of companies, as well as financial performance, is now an absolutely central concern in terms of companies' license to operate in wider society. The regulatory landscape is changing fast, with the Commission publishing proposals in April this year for a new corporate sustainability reporting directive. At a COP26 in Glasgow in November, of course, the IFRS Foundation announced the launch of the new International Sustainability Standards Board. So it's very timely for us to have a discussion about the challenges around sustainability reporting for organizations, for chief sustainability officers, for internal auditors, as they seek to meet expectations of each other and of leadership teams and boards, and comply with regulatory requirements as well. So I'm absolutely delighted that to guide us through this, we have three expert speakers to address the topic. First, we will hear from Philippe Angelis, who is a senior policy advisor at Insurance Europe, and who will talk us through recent EU regulatory developments around sustainable finance and reporting. Now, Philippe is a specialist in corporate reporting and sustainable finance at Insurance Europe, but before that was with EY, both as an auditor and as a consultant in the financial services practice. So he brings a wide spectrum of experience to bear on this. Following Philippe's presentation, we will then have a discussion between two distinguished guests. First, I'm delighted to introduce Frank van den Borre, who is the Group Director for Sustainability at Auditors, which is, of course, Belgium's largest insurance company, with a presence, I think, in 18 countries. Frank has been in his role since September 2020, but before that held a variety of senior roles in stakeholder engagement, performance management, and corporate finance for Aegeus over a period of many years, and so will give us a perspective from the point of view of the Chief Sustainability Officer. We also have with us Naohiro Mori, who is the Chief Auditor at AIG, the US insurer with a presence in, I think, 80 countries. He has been enrolled since 2018, previous roles in internal audit with MetLife, with JP Morgan, and with Shinsei Bank. And importantly for this audience, he has also been a member of the board of the global IIA, representing Japan since 2002. So a rich and deep vein of expertise to share with us this afternoon. A brief word about the running order. As I have said, Philippe will present us with the backdrop in terms of the regulatory landscape. Then we will have a conversation between Frank and Naohiro on some of the key issues and questions facing Chief Internal Auditors and Chief Sustainability Officers as they seek to work together to support their organisations to meet the challenges. During that session, we will have 2 or 3 questions for the participants to gauge the perspective and the situation in this the sample that we have with us here today. And at the end of the session, we will have questions and answers. So please, can I repeat Stephen's encouragement to all of you to use Slido to register your questions, and we will take a selection of those at the end of the session. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Philippe to give us an overview of EU developments in sustainable finance and reporting. Philippe.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I don't know if we can have the slides on screen so I can begin. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be speaking with you today on the EU developments on sustainability from a pure reporting perspective. So if we're looking a little bit at the agenda of what I'd like to cover in my brief presentation, we will begin by identifying what the key initiatives at EU level are in terms of sustainability reporting. We will have a look at the differences between the current framework under which companies are reporting and what the European Commission is proposing. So going from the Nfrd to the Csrd, we're going to look at how Europe intends to elaborate those EU sustainability standards. We'll have a look at the overall process and timeline, the key requirements of the Csrd, and then we'll end up with the other 2 initiatives next to the Csrd, which are the taxonomy regulation and the sustainable finance disclosure regulation. So before we begin all that, I think a few words on who Insurance Europe is, though I don't think I need to speak too long about this. I understand you've already had a word from our president this morning. So Insurance Europe is the European Insurance and Reinsurance Federation. So overall, we represent over 95% of the European insurance market by premium income. And we're committed to the creation of effective and efficient regulatory and supervisory framework for insurers and at European and also at international level. So if we have a look at the key initiatives at EU level, so as I explained in the agenda, they can be very easily summarized as essentially 3 pillars. We have the taxonomy regulation, which allows for a common definition of what sustainable activities are. The sustainability regulation also introduces a number of disclosure requirements, which I will go over. We have the Sfdr, so the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which also introduces a number of disclosure requirements, but also at product level as well as entity level. And then in order to fill the gaps and add another layer and another pillar to this sort of reporting framework is this Csrd, which will replace the current Nfrd. And this is the first initiative that we'll have a look at. So how do we move from the Nfrd to the Csrd? So the Nfrd is not a piece of legislation that has been in place for very long at European level. So it was adopted in 2014 and it started applying in 2018. So we've only had it for now 3 years. The Nfrd introduces a number of requirements to have sustainability disclosures, but doesn't mandate a single framework under which each company needs to apply those requirements. That means that in the current landscape, you have a lot of companies reporting under the Nfrd, but essentially not reporting the same things. They report under different frameworks which are allowed under the Nfrd. There's also quite some differences between member states in the way the Nfrd is currently applied. So member states have a number of options in terms of audit requirements, the location of the sustainability report, and the ability to follow international standards in terms of reporting. So if we move on to the next slide, what you see now is on the left we have the requirements on the Nfrd, and on the right we have what the Commission has proposed now in April of 2021. So under the current proposal by the Commission, the Csrd would start applying in 2024, covering the financial year 2023. This, of course, is currently being discussed at Parliament and Council level, but at this stage, I'd rather keep it to the European Commission proposal, because otherwise it gets very complicated very fast. So in terms of application date, it's 2024 for the year 2023. Then in terms of scope, the Csrd is much more ambitious than the Nfrd was. The Nfrd was focusing on PIEs, which had over 500 employees. That was the scope, and that covers around 11,700 companies in Europe. The Csrd dramatically increases the scope of companies in scope of this directive, and takes it from 11,700 companies all the way to 49,000 companies. And they cover all large companies, all companies that are listed, and SMEs are allowed to report under this directive under simplified requirements. Now, another significant change is, of course, assurance requirements. Under the Nfrd, only a few member states opted to have the option to have limited assurance on the sustainability reports. Now, under the Csrd, companies would be allowed to use limited assurance at first, but once the Commission develops standards for reasonable assurance of sustainability data, then companies will have to eventually report under those reasonable assurance requirements. That is a significant change from what we had before, and comes also at a great cost for companies. Another significant change is, of course, the creation of European sustainability reporting standards. So, as I said, under the Nfrd, companies were allowed to use a number of frameworks that already existed, but those were not applied uniformly throughout Europe. Now, with the Csrd, the Commission mandates EFRAG to develop sustainability standards that are going to be mandatory for all companies in scope. That is also a significant change. Now, in terms of where the information needs to be, under the Nfrd, it could be in a separate report. Now, under the Csrd, it needs to be part of the management report. So also, that's the Commission sending a signal that they want sustainability information to be treated just as important as financial information. Then there's also a difference in the format of the information to be provided, and that is guided by ASAP, but that's a bit outside the scope of what I want to cover today. So purely for the Nfrd, where do we stand exactly? So the European Commission published their proposal in April. The file is being discussed at European Parliament and Council, and we expect the regulation to be adopted by, or the directive to be adopted in Q1 or Q2 2022. This will, of course, depend on the nature of the discussions we have at Parliament and the ease with which Parliament and Council can agree on the final details of the directive. Of course, what the directive does is it gives EFRAG a mandate to develop standards. Those standards will have, the first set of standards will have to be provided in the summer of 2022. Of course, if the Csrd only is adopted in April, March, it leaves very little time for EFRAG to develop those standards. So EFRAG has already undertaken quite some work and already released a climate disclosure prototype, which is available in the annexes if people are interested in reading more about this. So what are the key requirements of the Csrd? Well, the Csrd introduces a number of new concepts, one of which is the concept of double materiality. So for all those familiar with financial reporting, we know what materiality is and how we define it. Now, double materiality is not only the impact that the environment has on your entity, but is also the impact your entity has on the environment. And so defining materiality and defining exactly how to define this materiality is a very complex discussion, and one that will have to take place now within EFRAG before those standards can be applied. There are also significant parts of the CSRD that mandate companies to report on intangibles, which is something that isn't really defined in terms of sustainability. So we know what intangibles, as in goodwill, is, for example, on the financial reporting side. It's not so clear what it is on the sustainability side, and that also needs to be defined. So maybe moving on to the next slide. So this is what's happening in Europe. Now, at the international level, of course, like Alistair mentioned earlier, the IFRS Foundation decided to also act and also get in the field of sustainability reporting. After years of, essentially a bit refusing to do so, they eventually did it, announced it at COP26. They announced the creation of the ISSB, so the International Sustainability Standard Board, and they released also climate reporting prototypes, much like Europe did a couple of months earlier. Now, what the IFRS Foundation has done is, of course, welcomed by the industry. For every player that's active both in Europe and outside Europe, it was essential that some sort of framework existed as well at the international level. Now, those standards at international level will be different than the ones we'll have in Europe, to some extent at least. So the standards that are developed at international level, from what the prototypes we've seen, are based on TCFD recommendations and SASB recommendations, or in the SASB framework that are existing frameworks. In Europe, we also based our requirements on the TCFD, but we also have requirements coming from the taxonomy and Sfdr, and we have this double materiality concept, which is not existent in international reporting standards. So this is some of the differences that exist between the two. So moving on to one of the other pillars, of course, is the taxonomy. What the taxonomy does is essentially it provides a dictionary for what is sustainable and what isn't. And that is, of course, an essential step in furthering sustainability goals, is that we all speak the same language. Alistair referred to the UN definition of sustainable that was developed in the 20th century. Now, the definition by the Commission is a bit different. So they say that activities that can be classified as sustainable if they contribute substantially to at least one of the objectives that you see on the slide. So the objectives are climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, use of water and marine resources, circular economy, pollution prevention, and health ecosystems. They also need to do no significant harm to any of the other 5 objectives, and they need to comply with minimum social safeguards. So you see the definition is much stricter than what we had before. It's much better defined. And of course, the taxonomy regulation introduces a number of requirements also at product level and at entity level. So if we look at the entity level indicators, those are the reporting requirements under Article 8 of the taxonomy. Entities will have to disclose KPIs on the taxonomy alignment of their underwriting activity and of their investment activity. Of course, this is a huge operational challenge, because you need to be able to screen your activity to consider whether it's taxonomy aligned or not. And it's particularly a challenge on the investment side, since the percentage of assets that are today considered taxonomy aligned is very small. We've seen, for example, every green bond issuance is many times oversubscribed, and this is a significant challenge in the years to come. And now the final pillar, I hope I haven't been too long, but the final pillar is the Sfdr. And there, again, it introduces a number of disclosures at product level and at entity level. For the entity level disclosures, you'll have to report on principal adverse impacts of your products. And at product level, you'll have disclosures that come into the pre-contractual disclosures, periodic reports, and website disclosures. So I don't want to spend any or take too much time with my presentation. The key takeaway is there's a lot coming the way of insurance companies in terms of sustainability reporting. And it's very easy to get a bit lost in the details, also considering the very different timelines that we have here. So the CSRD is going to, if we follow the Commission's proposal, come in place in 2024. The Sfdr already applies. The taxonomy is coming in 2022. Very challenging environment, and happy to take any questions if there are any. Alistair, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Philippe. I think what comes out very clearly is that this is a complex landscape. It's a fast-moving landscape. Requirements and expectations are arising, and there is a very real challenge in terms of clarity about expectations, a challenge that's technical and existential. And I think that that sets a pretty sobering backdrop for the discussion that we will have. So if I could turn now to Frank and Naohiro. Against that backdrop, I think perhaps to start the conversation, Frank, if I could turn to you to start us off by saying a little about the essential elements of your role, which is a relatively new one, and the current position of the sustainability function in Ageas.
Thank you, Alistair, and first of all, good afternoon to all of you. Absolutely, Alistair, my role, and especially this creation of a sustainability department has only been done about 1.5 years ago. So it is indeed a function that is very new within the organization of Ageas. That being said, I'm personally myself already actively working around sustainability for more than 4 years in the organization, but previously it was not named sustainability, which as such also says something, as clearly the organization was not yet ready to use sustainability as the name of a department. It may sound a bit weird, but it was the reality. But I think it also illustrates how new this topic was for us, and probably in general for a lot of companies, although I've seen that some insurance companies have already been working around sustainability themes for a longer time. And of course, every company has a history. If I talk about Ageas, some of you may know that we, of course, come out of the ashes of the Fortis Group, who suffered a lot of the financial crisis in 2008. And I was especially myself active as head of investor relations in those days. So first years of this decade were really focused on creating trust on the financial performance of the company. Hence, the agenda of the company was perhaps more focused on those topics. That being said, as you rightly say, Alistair, today it is not possible not to work around sustainability and to reflect how you can integrate the thinking on sustainability within the strategy of the company. And that's what we have been doing over the past 4 years, but really prudently laying the foundations, first of all, but obviously also prepare the company for things that are happening for investors that already for years are using these criteria to judge whether they will continue to invest in the company or not. Other stakeholders also being more and more interested in the vision and in the approach of companies from a sustainability point of view. And all that is really new. And if I should describe what I have been doing over the past years, essentially is, first of all, understand what sustainability could mean for us, because as Philippe said, it's a very vast topic. So you also have to decide and reflect where you put the priorities. And in combination, creating a lot of awareness, which is also a kind of education in the organization for all colleagues in all departments, what sustainability means, how it should be translated, what each of them has to do to come to a fully embraced strategy in the organization, well embedded, and at the same time make a lot of preparations in practice to work on ratings, on business development, product development, investment strategies, name it. It's a very wide scope, which makes it also very attractive, but also complex to implement.
Thank you very much, Frank. Rather like in internal audit, sustainability requires you to have a view across the entirety of the company's operations, and is existential in nature. Now, Hero, if I could turn to you, from your position as a chief internal auditor, well, would you like to comment on the situation in relation to the sustainability function in AIG? Because I know that you produced your first ESG report earlier this year, but you have a sustainability function that may have been established slightly earlier.
That is correct, Alistair. Good morning to all. I guess good afternoon in Europe. I'm sitting in my New York office, so it's early and bright. And as you said it correctly, Alistair, and the AIG's Chief Sustainability Officer, Jennifer Grant, was actually hired in 2019 with the goal that our senior management has set to be the carbon emission to be net zero by 2050. And we have also made commitment to 10 principles in a UN compact. So those activities has accelerated the ESG reporting. As Philip indicated, that the marketplace is moving very fast. And lots of regulations are actually coming out, including SEC in the United States has woken up. And then they are actually mandating, going to be mandating the reporting. And then there'll be some framework about the penalty if you do not properly report. So the importance of ESG in particular focus is at the highest level. As Frank indicated, that many investors, if you don't have ESG rating, today will not deal with you. So it is actually a huge pressure coming from the investor public for us to report properly and have the right framework of the sustainability reporting. And we, as you said it correctly, Alistair, that we were actually able to report ESG first time in 2020. And I'm very proud that we were actually able to do that despite all the different frameworks that are in existence. And we are actually seeing some convergence of the standards. However, there are differences between Europe and North America and Asia. And I think we have a long way to go. But we are also looking at in 2021 and 2022 to bring in the third party first time to evaluate the report. I think we came a very long way, but very quickly to realize that this report is such a paramount importance to the investor public.
Thank you very much, No Hero. And another picture of evolution. And with that in mind, we'd like to have a quick snap poll for participants representing a variety of companies on this forum today. And we'd like to ask you, what is the status of the sustainability function in your organization? And we'd invite you to vote to choose between very mature, just created, under discussion, there isn't one, or don't know. And we'd like to give you a minute to get your votes in, because it will be really interesting to see against that evolutionary backdrop what the state of play is in the companies represented here today. And we'll just give it a few more seconds for people to make up their mind, which in itself may tell us something about the visibility and the maturity of the sustainability function. And I think we will hold it there. And the picture appears to be that only 20% have a fully mature sustainability function. Over 30% have just created one, and it's interesting to see that for nearly 15% of the organisations represented here today, the sustainability function is still being discussed, and this against a backdrop of rapidly moving and rapidly increasing regulatory expectations is, I think, is quite an interesting finding. So against that backdrop, could I perhaps ask our two panelists about the short-term challenges as they see them in terms of sustainability reporting in the organisation over the coming year or so. Now, Hero, if I could ask you first, I mean, you've mentioned getting in an external perspective on your reporting, but what would you describe as the biggest short-term challenge that you face from your function in the organisation in relation to expressing a view on or providing any assurance over sustainability reporting?
Thank you, Alistair. Us auditors are very good at looking at things in the process and things that are tangible. Felipe mentioned that there are intangibles that needs to be reported in the future, and then that's actually some of the forward-looking elements included in the reports are made up of assumptions, models that we actually need to look at without any clear guidance, clear, tangible gauge that we can actually resort to. So it's almost like we will actually have to go think about what is the adequate level of the information that we are providing and the completeness. And that has always been a challenge for forward-looking information, particularly like carbon footprints, and then completeness of the information. We're very good at looking at where the data points are available, reconciling them, and then reporting them. But with the moving target of, as has been described, the standards are not clear, it's the differentials between the different regions, even the different standard setting body looks at the different elements. To capture everything is actually a monumental task. And that's what we're actually dealing with right now, with the amount of data that's available, amount of data that could potentially be available, and how do we actually gauge properly? And to get to the reasonable assurance, what is the level of reasonable assurance that we need to get to? And that's really the challenge that we have right now.
Thank you, Hiro. The question then is, how good is good enough when there is so much data, when standards are evolving, and when guidance is scarce? But Frank, if I could turn to you as the person in the firing line in terms of producing the sustainability report for Ageas, how would you describe the biggest element of the challenge from where you sit?
Well, probably a few things. I'll try to combine them. And first of all, I would refer to what Philip said. I mean, the fact that the regulation is going so fast is still a moving target. Is not always clear from the start how you have to interpret it and do it. The harmonization efforts that are ongoing at various levels, knowing that we also as a company, we're active, as you said, Alistair, in Europe and Asia. So you also have different interpretations sometimes of the same concepts, and you have to find one definition for yourself, but also making sure that what we report is understood in the same way as competitors do, so that the outside world reads information in the same way. So consistency. All that to me is a challenge which boils down in disclosures, annual reports or other disclosures, because in the end it's also a massive work internally, as Nair was mentioning, to get all these data, to collect them. It's not like an accounting process, which is a very robust process that we all know, but here clearly we're tapping into new worlds to collect all these non-financial data, as we call them, from various sources. In some cases we even need to first see how we can collect them before actually being even able to report them. And yeah, I mean, some people are fast moving in the organization, others are slow moving. And there is also a goal to reach with the company. So that is at the same time, also maybe referring to the survey you just did, the function could be mature. My function, if I look at our company, is pretty mature, but I'm still working on having the same level of maturity in the entire organization with my colleagues that have to help me to execute my role.
Yeah. So the challenge of data, the challenge of process, the challenge of data, the challenge of process, the challenge of pace.
Yes.
Clearly coming out there. There's also, I think, a question relevant to both chief sustainability officers and to internal auditors around the governance here. And around the governance that is put around the sustainability reporting process. And I'd like to ask whether roles and responsibilities and reporting lines are clearly organized in relation to sustainability reporting. And perhaps, Nahira, could I turn to you first? I mean, what are the key reporting lines in relation to sustainability reporting at AIG?
Right, Alistair. So in AIG, Chief Sustainability Officer reports to General Counsel because they are still trying to figure out what the right framework is. But she does also have a direct line to CEO, who is the huge proponent to the sustainability reporting, and then pushing the net zero by 2050. So within that framework, we do also have a sustainability integration team, different working groups with the enterprise risk management, and then also reporting part, which Frank has touched on. There are vast amount of data that we need to deal with, which is quantitative, both quantitative and qualitative data. So we need to actually extract those data from our day-to-day activities, or whether it's processes, from the organization. And then we do also have net zero working group that actually collates all this information and then puts the prospective information to it, put it into the modeling, and then calculate that. So we have all those framework already in place and then operating.
That's very complex picture in terms of the executive reporting lines, but of course there are the various board reporting lines too. Now, different companies have approached this in different ways, and I wonder, Frank, if you can tell us a little about the board level reporting lines at Ageas, whether through a bespoke sustainability committee or through audit and risk or through other fora.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have a board that is very committed to sustainability. I would actually even say that my board is even more pushing to implement sustainability at some point than the management, which is good. And there's a quite good level of expertise across the board. And that's actually also the guiding principle of our chairman was not, as some companies do, or as is sometimes suggested, we have not created a specific, say, ESG committee within the board. So the idea is that when I go to the board, and that normally happens, say, twice a year, to report on the status and the evolution of what I'm doing, I'm seeing the full board. Of course, the board committees are involved on specific activities. Could be the audit committee when the annual report has to be discussed, could be the risk committee for specific ESG risk assessments that are part of the activities of the risk department. The remuneration committee will discuss on how ESG KPIs are integrated in the variable remuneration, the management remuneration schemes. So there's also that dedicated responsibility within the board. But overall, the guideline we follow, the governance we follow, is that the full board is involved and that I have a frequency of going twice or even 3 times a year, going to the board to report myself on what we do.
Yeah. Thank you. That's interesting. Two contrasting approaches there, and I think perhaps we can come back on another occasion to the question of board committees' roles in this. But perhaps we should move on now to look a little bit into the extent to which internal audit has been able to undertake audit activity on particular aspects of sustainability over the past year or so. And now, Hero, could you tell us a little about what your team has been doing in relation to sustainability over the past year, and what's in the plan for the year ahead?
Right, Alistair. So I just wanted to make sure that I add our board also pays a lot of attention to the ESG reporting, and just like Frank said, that we have risk committee who looks at the risk assessment, and then also the reporting itself. Audit committee comes to that part of that as well, and then the entire board looks at the report. So in terms of the engagements in the past, as I said, that our first report went out in 2020. So we looked at all the source documents and processes, and we were obviously integral part of those working groups. So we were actually able to see the makings of sausage, so to speak. So we observed that, and then we actually went back to the source documents and making sure that those informations are correctly calculated, and then the completeness of the information as well. Now, as I said, that the report does include both quantitative and qualitative information. Now, many of the qualitative information are prospectus information or the sometimes assumptions that have been used based on the model that are used. Now, we were able to confirm some of the basics making of those assumptions. However, this is the part that I think we are going to be a lot more intelligent about how to adequately assess this prospective information, which is actually being used in elsewhere based on, let's say, carbon footprint by 2050. How do we think about calculating certain conceptual framework into the numbers, the concrete numbers that we can audit? And this is part of the skill sets that we will actually have to develop within ourselves by really understanding what are the implications from the process, and then translate that into the conceptual framework that is being reported. And then how do we adequately assess and then evaluate the information? So that's really what we've been doing, and then what we are actually thinking about doing in the future. Clearly, as I said, the third party will come in to evaluate the numbers. So therefore, we will have to actually work with the third party, which is most likely the Big Four accounting firm, just like what we do with the Sarbanes-Oxley. So.
Thank you, now Hero. I very much like the image of being in the sausage machine and reporting on the sausage machine at the same time, which is the classic challenge of internal audit, but expressed in a very good way. Frank, can you tell us a little about the attention that you have had from the internal audit function in Ageas on sustainability over the past year or so?
Well, they indeed effectively also undertook an internal audit on our processes and our organization. And I think if I go back to the mission they defined with us was that at that time it was, I think, last year. So let's say 2 years after I started working on implementing a first strategy for the group. So they were more interested in the governance, in the fact if indeed with the plan I've put in place, I was from their perspective covering the main risks they saw, the compliance with regulation. So you could see this IE as assuring, checking from an internal perspective if I was preparing the company well to the minimum level of compliance on sustainability. So they were not necessarily looking to the opportunistic part of the strategy, which is, I think, perfectly okay. So that was the first, and if I say the governance, then obviously I mean the governance towards board, assure that the board was sufficiently involved, informed, that we were not taking any risk there. The same for top management. The fact that I report to the CEO was already a first element of confidence, of trust, but definitely also how the organization was involved in the large sense in trying to implement sustainability. So more the process part, the risk part, the compliance part, and as now Rier was suggesting, I'm sure that in the next stage, definitely focus would also go to the reporting of KPIs of non-financial data, how the quality of these data are, if the processes are robust, and more, I would say also in preparation of what Philip was mentioning, the fact that within a couple of years, the external assurance on all the non-financial data will become obvious. Hence, internal audit will definitely want to do a first check on that as well.
Yeah. That's very much a picture of a shared challenge there between the sustainability and internal audit functions, and I wanted just to take that a little bit further and ask about the relationship and the collaboration between internal audit teams and sustainability teams, and how you would characterize the working relationship between the two teams. And now, Hero, how would you describe the relationship going forward?
As I said, that the process in AIG is still evolving. So right now we actually play more of a quality assurance role, and then provide the comfort to the senior management and then the board and then the investing public about the information that are contained in the reports are true and correct and complete. Now, I expect that our role will continue to be quality assurance, just like Sarbanes-Oxley, but more of advisory and then consulting role in the future as we roll in more regulations, and the process will evolve, and many of the reporting needs to be automated. So I will continue to see the very robust relationship between us and then the sustainability office and reporting part. Obviously, there's a large finance part that needs to be involved in reporting these numbers. So we maintain very good relationship with all three parties.
Yeah. Thank you, Hero. Does that resonate with you, Frank, in terms of the shared, the sort of collaborative approach going forward?
Yes, absolutely. I think also in our case, internal audit is helping to give assurance and confidence to management that the processes are well organized. They have also a role to play towards the board. I don't know now if that's the same for you, but every quarter there is the audit letter that goes to the board. And I can assume that going forward, again, as I just mentioned, going forward, this will not just cover the financial data, but also the whole part of non-sustainable or sustainable or non-financial reporting.
Yeah. Thank you. Now, in order to leave time to deal with questions from participants, I'd just like to ask one more question, which is of particular interest to our internal audit participants here, and it's a question about skill set. Now, from your different positions in the organisation, what would you say are the most critical, specific skills that internal auditors need to add real value to the organization in this area. And now Hero is something that I know you've been thinking about quite hard. So what would you say are the top specific skills that you need in your team to add more value there?
Right, Alistair. So as I said, as I touched briefly in my previous comment, many of the things that relates to sustainability reporting and regulations are still changing, and it's a moving target. So ability to really take into those what's changed and really conceptually understand that and then apply that to what we have in the process. Internal auditors are very good at looking at the processes, which is actually tangible, right? So bringing intangible to tangible and conceptualizing things to real thing is the skill sets that I expect that internal auditors need to acquire if you don't have already, because this isn't simply that, okay, so you have the A to Z testing plan and then you go in and test. That's not what this is all about. You have to actually sit in the meeting. You have to understand what are the implications of, let's say, underwriting documentation. How does that relate to carbon footprint? Building, how does that actually relate to the reduction in emissions? And how do we actually test that? And that's really what the skill sets that we would actually require in the future.
It's from process to context to outcome.
Absolutely.
Is the journey I think that we all need to take. Now, Frank, from where you sit, what skills would you find particularly would add most value to the task that you're trying to perform at Ageas?
You need to be multi-skilled, I'm afraid. So indeed, I'm happy that I could bring a lot of experience in many functions into this role. I also think that it helped to give enough visibility from the start, the fact that I have a certain seniority. And now that I'm in the function and I have to implement and be successful, what are the main skills I see? Well, first of all, having the capacity to look broad and to think broad. So at the one hand, as an example, you have to be able to understand a very detailed regulation and see how you have to implement it in a proper way. And at the same time, you must be able to discuss with the business people on how this should be integrated tomorrow in product development. That is a quite wide, I would say, scope of skills you need, and communication is also key, because I'm spending a lot of time in creating internal and external awareness on what we do, how we have to do it, should and do it. So very wide set of skills is the ideal.
Yes. So superhumans wanted, both for internal audit and for sustainability. Applications here. Thank you very much indeed, Frank, now Hero. Very rich insights of a challenge that's fast evolving, and we have just a couple of minutes left to deal with some questions that participants have submitted via Slido during your conversation. And the first question is whether, in your view, the reporting standards are increasing the level of ambition on ESG objectives, or perhaps even reducing it because of the reporting requirements. So the tension, or the potential tension, between those two, and perhaps could I ask Philippe just to offer a perspective from the sector as a whole to think about that potential paradox?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a very interesting question, and it is indeed the risk that essentially sustainability reporting becomes a compliance exercise, instead of truly shifting the focus of companies towards sustainability. But I mean, what we've seen also through the poll earlier is, well, some companies haven't really set themselves up to take responsibility for those new requirements and those new asks from various stakeholders, not only investors, but also civil society, governments. And so the standards will, in any case, create a floor and a minimum requirement for everyone to comply with a number of sustainability targets. But indeed, and it's going to be a big challenge for the Commission and Parliament when developing the standards. If they go somehow too far and ask too much as this baseline, it will render the whole exercise indeed only a compliance exercise, and it will not further sustainability goals like they would wish them to be, a true paradigm shift. So that's a very good question.
Yeah. And I suspect a question which will play out in the way that the standards and requirements evolve over the coming 2 years at least, and probably longer. Frank, we talked a little about governance and reporting lines. Could I ask you a question from one of our participants? Would you recommend to others in the insurance sector the establishment of a specific board committee on sustainability, or would you see other routes and board level oversight as more effective in providing the top level support and challenge that you need to deliver on the requirements for reporting at Ageas?
Okay. Let me perhaps widen a bit the question. So first at board level, as your question is. So as I said, we didn't do it. So we have chosen the route of involving the entire board on all ESG topics to ensure that all board members have a certain level of understanding and contribution. In the specific committees, specific topics are being discussed. An element you could consider, and I'm not saying that this is the only model, and you could do it differently. Another element that we have already considered but not yet done is to see to what extent you could invite at some point specific experts in a certain topic without being a board member, but to indeed bring some additional expertise in due time in the discussion, and also to be challenged, or to allow the board to be challenged at the right moment on certain things. At management level, for information, we did set up a specific steering committee aside from the regular hierarchical organization led by the CEO, but enabling, say, every 2 months to bring all the people, the key people in the organization together to discuss progress, but also to exchange expertise in the different domains on what they are doing around sustainability to maximize cross-fertilization and integration of what we are doing in our different corners.
Thank you. And I think that's a really important note on which to draw this this fascinating session to a close, of sharing experience between functions and cross organizations as we navigate our way. And I think one of the things that has come through very strongly to me in the discussion today is the importance of sharing knowledge and developing best practice guidance against a backdrop of a changing environment that will only get more complex before it gets more simple. With that, I would like simply to thank our participants and our expert panel for a fascinating conversation, which I think speaks to the complexity and the importance of the challenge around sustainability. So thank you very much indeed to Frank, to Naohiro, and to Philippe. Plenty of food for thought, and I'm sure the ECIIA will be looking to see how it can play its part in supporting the profession to address this challenge.